What is up, everybody? Welcome to Murray and J08. This is my photography podcast, Focus Recompose, new episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Today we have a special episode. By popular viewer request, a request that I got for quite a while now. So I'm definitely making this video for you guys on multiple accounts of social media. Can we take a look at your, not so much because you could always go click on the links, but a journey into my portfolio. Taking a look at my portfolio, but having kind of like my story behind it. A story's behind the pictures, as I like to call it. So I'm definitely, that was, I said to myself, wow, what a great idea. Instead of just, having people go to my portfolio or having me show the portfolio, which I've done in the past. And we can't look at, obviously, every picture because I have multiple accounts of portfolios. I have like 20 sites. I picked one of my favorite ones, and we're going to go through some of the images, not all of them. And I'm going to talk a little bit about them and kind of like the story behind the shot. I'm going to call this a journey, a journey through pictures. Every picture has a story behind it. And photography is all about, a story. It's creating a story in time. It's freezing something in time. I always like to say, instead of taking pictures, let's create a story. Let's create a picture instead of taking a picture. Let's create a shot. I always tell people that. And I learned that from the great Rick Salmon, a good buddy of mine, Canon Explorer of Light. And it's true. I can't, really stress that enough. It's such a true words of wisdom as a photographer, especially to another photographer. Some people come up to me and say, what are some great inspiration or words of advice for taking pictures? And I say, don't take pictures, create a scene, create a story. Think of it in your head and then act it out just like a movie director. This way, later on, you could talk about the picture like I'm going to do here, and you could put words to an image, You could put a story to it. I mean, not every single picture you take has to have this dramatic story, but, there's always something you could tell somebody, and then they could, inspire them or recreate it and then give them an inspiration to go and shoot something similar and make it their own. That's what I've been doing. That's what I do on workshops when I show pictures off, or when I teach photography and Photoshop and post processing or anything really. Is talk about pictures, talk about what you do, explain things, and then people have kind of like a story behind the actual explanation. Helps them a lot and helps them. Oh yeah, now when they see it, they're like, I remember that, he went through this, or he had to do this, and he was thinking of this at the time. Kind of like when you listen to a song and then you hear from, the writer or the singer why he wrote that song, but also what it means to you, because it can mean something to you totally different, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. Pictures are the same. A lot of times when I see pictures from these famous photographers, I think of something. It may not have been what they were thinking of when they took it or why they took it, but it's what the picture means to me. And that's important, Let's take a look. And I picked, as for this project here, I picked 500px instead of like Flickr or Squarespace or any other, or Instagram. I think 500px is a pretty good site. As you can see from this portfolio, when you get done with it, I love shooting everything. I love shooting portraits. I love shooting nature. I'm huge into macro photography. I love animals. I love landscapes. I love, travel photography and meeting people along the way and getting their story and capturing, their memories. I love shooting weddings, sporting events, events in general, and pretty much, I'm on what they call on the fly photographer. I go to the call, whatever it is. If somebody says, "Oh, I need a guy to shoot this," I'll do it. I'm pretty much all around. I'll try something. If I've never done it before, I'll try it. You know, um, and flowers, macro photography, I love doing it. What's cool about 500px is that they will show you the details. If you're like a geek or a photographer, they'll show you the shutter speed, the aperture, the f-stop, the ISO. They'll show you what lens. They'll show you what camera. Pretty cool that it does all that. Okay, this was a test shot that I did when I got my Sony A7. I believe this was with the Sony A7. Yeah, the Sony Alpha A7 mirrorless with the 28-70. These are spring shots. All the flowers were just blooming in the spring up here in northern New Jersey. So I was doing some test shots with that. Getting children in the act, I love doing black and white. Black and white. I love doing portraits. Black and white just gives you could almost take anything and give it a black and white, filter, shoot it in black and white, and it just gives it a story automatically. Another thing that you'll notice in this portfolio that I absolutely love to do is what they call selective color. This is when you take a shot. So I shot this in black and white. Well, I'm sorry. I shot it in color. So even when you want the end result to be black and white, you'll always shoot in color to get the full resolution because you could do your post-processing later. I always tell people that. They have a setting in a lot of these cameras to shoot black and white. Don't do that. Shoot in full color and make your edits later. This way you always have the option. Like when I do a wedding and a lot of shots, the people want in black and white, I'll make a separate album that's full color. But when I do the final edit album, if they want one in black and white, I always have the option to go black and white, but they still have the full color resolution photo. Well, same with this. This was shot in color, but what I did was I put it into Photoshop and I made it black and white. And then what happens is in Photoshop, you use what's called layers. So the underlying layer was still color. So what I do is a method called selective color, and what I did was I brushed the areas back in that I wanted in color, and I brushed in these little locker boxes where people will put their stuff before they go onto the beach. Very popular at weddings for people's flower bouquets, and very, very popular with portraits, selective color, as you'll see in my portfolio. It's a very, very special effect that people do love. Sunsets and sunrises, I absolutely love shooting them. You'll see that throughout the portfolio if you check my portfolios out. I love shooting children, kids, babies. It's a very popular in my business. It's first moments. You're always trying to get the expressions out of the children. I've learned all about how to get expressions out of them, how to make them laugh, how to get their attention. The small little details in life. It's not always about the big picture. It's about going in and getting the small details like macro photography. For example, like this garden gnome, stuff that you wouldn't think that's sometimes right in your backyard. I absolutely love shooting automobiles. I love car photography. I'm big into cars, and I absolutely love car photography. Huge into drones. This was in northern New Jersey. This was way, way up. I like to shoot my drones high up, and I was doing some field shots, and this is some stuff that you'll never be able to see other than from a drone. So I do a lot of aerial views. Drone photography is very cool. I don't know if you guys ever heard of this, but this is a photography method called HDR, high dynamic range. And there's different forms of HDR. You don't have to go to the extremes, but this is what I call to the extremes. I shoot different forms of HDR. HDR is the best way to show the darkest parts of an image to the lightest parts of an image and get everything all in one. But then you can also go what's called, computer effects, kind of, to the extreme, kind of. That's what this is. It works great with certain scenes. I find it works great with automobiles because of that rustic look you can get from like the metal. So this would be an HDR shot. Okay, it's kind of hyper realistic, surrealistic, a shot. And certain things it works really good with, some things it doesn't. You don't have to always pull it all the way to the extreme with HDR. You can let off a little bit on it. I went all the way on this one. I thought it looked good. So this is an HDR shot that I shot in New Jersey. Okay, more children portraits. Another thing that I like to do is space and moon shots. Whenever I hear on the news or I have an app that tells me when the next moon phase or whatever is going to be, I go out there with my zoom lens. I believe this was taken with a 70 to 200, but then again on an APS-C censored, crop censored camera, you get more zoom than you would on an FX full frame camera. A Canon 7D Mark II with a 70 to 200 2.8. Shot at 200 millimeter. Okay? Beautiful shot. Again, selective color. This was shot black and white, and I painted in with the Wacom tablet on the Mac, the flowers. More macro photography, landscapes. I do a lot of travel photography. Met this girl. She was just sitting in the street there. I asked her, politely, and she absolutely was all for it, and I did a whole portrait shoot of her. I thought she was very interesting. Portrait photography, street photography is one of my favorite to do, and she was a really good subject. Again, some of the finest details. This was at a bar. Again, another moon phase. Portrait photography. Wanted a portrait shoot of her in the sunflower fields here in northern New Jersey. Did it in what they call the golden hour. Beautiful light coming in. I did a one speed light setup on the go, run and gun as I like to call it. I did a documentary on bridges in New Jersey. This was a bridge. Actually, this was bridges of New Jersey and New York. This was actually New York, Port Jervis, actually, which were on the border. This is actually HDR, believe it or not. HDR because you can get the fine details in the shadow areas of under the bridge, and then you get the beautiful detail of the sky. Portrait shoots. Ricky of Luna Park. I did this documentary for a publication called Weird New Jersey, which does crazy things that happen throughout New Jersey, urban legends, crazy events. This guy actually runs a art gallery in his house, and I got him on the side, and I said, I'd love to do a portrait shoot of you, because everybody was shooting like the actual museum, and he said, sure. And I actually did this privately for myself, my portfolio. I went there with a one speed light setup, reflector, and I took this portrait shoot of him. Great guy. Again, more portrait shoots. This is my actual studio, portrait studio of my lighting. I'm doing a fashion shoot. This was what they call a high key with a white background. Showing the different lighting setups. This was with what they call a snoot, which was the black background with a light behind her, and then a strobe with a snoot attached to it, pointing at her to get the catch light in her hair, in her eye, and a hair light, or a kicker light as they call it. Another high key shot. Um, Zoo pictures of animals. Always good to have. Beach beach scenes, sunset, sunrise, Florida beach. Really cool shot here. Weddings, one of the many, many weddings that I shot. This would be an example. Bride and groom, and then the mother of the bride. Again, black and white, shot in color. Um, Added black and white later in Photoshop. They wanted their dog included in the wedding, so I did a nice little shoot of him. Very popular with weddings nowadays. Cruise ships. Did a documentary for Carnival many years ago on all their ships. This was a Half Moon Cay coming into the island, docking, getting ready to dock the ferry boat. Another automobile shot. This was actually done with Silver Effects Pro, which is a filter effects add-on that you can get for Photoshop by Nick Software. Great software. I follow this team around of Taekwondo and Ninjutsu. His name is Master Ken. I shot for his team. Great group of kids. Great team. I shot for him for action shots. This was a group shot that I shot for him during a event, a military event, and they were there performing. So I shot them in front of the truck, the army truck. This was the Queen of the Fair and Little Miss Queen of the Fair for the year of New Jersey State Fair. They were there also. I got her, did a nice portrait shoot of her with their tiaras on. There's another one of her later on that I'll show you. This was for the Carnival documentary when I did Carnival cruise ships. This was in one of their lobbies, believe it or not. This is a HDR shot, one of the extreme HDR shots. So this is the potential that you can get with HDR. And I'll actually explain to you a little bit of HDR, how that works. So you're not going to get this in camera. Basically, how you're going to get this effect is that you shoot in burst mode. So you would set your camera to a burst mode. It's usually 3, 5, or 7. I believe this one was 5. So you would shoot normal exposure, then say 2 overexposed and 2 underexposed. You would take all the exposures and you would layer them in Photoshop, and then it would batch them and make like a hybrid photo. And then once you would bring them into Photoshop, batched and layered, you could take it from there. You could put your own tweaks on it. It'll give you the tools in Photoshop. There's other tools also that do it. There was a program back in the day called Photomatics that I used to use. But right now, they've come such a long way with Photoshop. I do everything in Photoshop now. And then I might do some last-minute edits in Lightroom. But that's about it. Again, selective color for a wedding. This is very popular with a nice white vignette. Vignettes are another popular portrait, effect. Fireworks. Again, Mrs. New Jersey Queen of the Fair. Nice portrait shoot. 70 to 200, razor pin sharp. I was testing out a fisheye. This is a fisheye lens. Very cool lens. Definitely different. I was doing a documentary on Native Americans. This was one of their rituals, one of their dances that they performed. This was in Mexico. This is like an image that you wouldn't know unless I told you. This is a tiny model. This is not a real building. Like my foot would be like right here. There was a place in Mexico where they actually had modeled images of little villages, and I was documenting it. And this is actually HDR because you just get that fine detail. More street photography. She was cooking in the Bahamas. She was making something homemade. People love to be photography. This was a band that I had to cover for a local band shoot. Getting the band in action. Some guitar playing. Some drum playing. So, all different types of scenarios. Another great version or great example of a HDR. This was in New York. I had to cover and do a whole documentation on Woodstock. So I went inside the museum, and this is actually inside the museum, and this is the bus. You can actually go in this bus, the hippie bus, and watch a video. And it was darkly lit, so I actually had, I believe it was a 2-speed light setup, and this was a HDR shot. That's the actual near Woodstock. Yasker's farm. Again, more macro photography for flowers. Just showing depth of field and different types of views and, following the eye. I thought this was a great example. Just kept going into the distance. Pretty neat. Some more landscape photography. Dusk and dawn. The golden hours, I like to call them. Panorama. This was shot, I believe, with 15 pictures stitched together in Photoshop in the fall. Again, this was Master Ken's Taekwondo team following them on the road. Another group shot. Doing portrait photography on the go. A car shoot I did for Bentley. Macro photography. Travel photography. This was HDR, just showing color. An automobile shoot. I love to do car shows. This was at a car show. Selective color. I actually did the shoot, and the guy actually bought this picture from me when I took it for him. That's very popular at car shows. When you do shoots for people's cars, they go nuts. This was the Atlantis. In the background there at the Bahamas, this was a lighthouse. This was actually taken from a ship with a zoom lens. I love shooting waterfalls. I love freezing the water with a very low shutter speed using a neutral density filter. Believe this one is, this is actually a fall shot that I did at a state park. This is actually a oil painted filter that I drew over a picture with a brush. Pretty neat effect. Just some of the nice post-processing that you could do with Photoshop. Funny story about this picture. This was at an apple orchard, believe it or not, in New Jersey. And the second half of this picture is actually fake. I actually made that reflection by making a mirrored image and flipped it, making it look like a lake with the reflection. Worked out pretty cool. Had to do a documentary on the life of a jellyfish in the ocean. These came pretty cool. A lot of detail. Mystic Seaport in Connecticut. Nice lighthouse. HDR shot. Sunflower field shoot. I was there doing some portraits of some clients, and I just went around and did some macros of sunflowers. Got the bee there. This is what they call a composite using Photoshop. Some fun stuff I do in my free time. Mystic Seaport. This was in Connecticut. This is HDR. Some of these were in the New Jersey State Fair. Some of these are blue ribbons, and some of these are first place winners. Selective color. Another great example of selective color. Black and white, and then brushing in what you want in color. Pretty cool. Pretty cool effect here. Here's a great example. That's another popular when you're going to do portraits in a sunflower. Inside of a car, HDR. Great for detail. Street photography, guy in the Bahamas. Some pine cones. Girl wanted a wall canvas on her wall of pine cones. Went out and shot that for her. Here, another great example of freezing water. And a lot of people ask how you do that. Again, it's with a neutral density filter, because what happens is that you're using such a low shutter during the day that your image would technically be way overexposed, but you put on your lens what they call a that's my phone. What they call a neutral density filter. I like to basically call it sunglasses for your camera, basically. This would be another great example. Sunglasses for your camera is basically what a neutral density filter is. So you're able to use those low shutter speeds and get that nice effect without overblowing your shot. Again, automobile photography. This was actually, I believe this was a car show that was taking place in Universal Studios in Florida. Pretty cool. That was another pine cone from that pine cone shoot. Great light, great, golden hour, they call it. Great other forms of HDR. Lots of HDR, lots of macro photography. This was a portrait studio session of some clients that came in. This was a documentation that I had to do, a documentary that I had to do on flight. So this was a pilot that came in. panoramic shot. A lot of nature shots, photography, a lot of macros. Surfing in Florida. I did a whole shoot on trains, abandoned trains. A nice panoramic shot of a state park. Macro photography. Shot a baseball game. Another wedding that I shot. Getting some great, scenes in action for memories. Another great example of selective color. Underground caverns. Some more nature macro photography. That's a yellow spotted giant lizard. They're pretty cool. Lizard, anal lizard from Florida. I guess he wanted his picture taken. Another car shoot that I did. This one's called Old Donna. HDR of an old barn out in PA, Pennsylvania. Macro photography. Dragonfly. They're always cool. Not the easiest to shoot. That was one that was in the state fair. Gotta love flower shots, right? There's an old pelican from Florida. And that's just some. I could go over more portfolio sites and more pictures, and it goes on and on. I got literally thousands of shoots. This is just a fraction. But, that's just some of the photography and, some of the stories behind them. And what do you guys like to shoot? I'd like to hear from you guys. What is your do you guys do any photography? Do you guys like to, do any shooting? This was interesting here. This was so real quick, another story behind this is a good one that lends a story to. I believe it was Cooperstown, PA, out in that area. We had a bunch of friends that had a place down there. We used to go every year camping, and they had this beautiful field, and it was gorgeous for landscape photography. And they had this huge empty field with this one tree that stood all by itself. And what they would do is they did a shoot every season of the tree. So they had the tree, and they made like a 4-framed image on their wall. So they had the tree in spring, summer, fall, winter, you know what I mean? And it was pretty cool. And every year they would do that at the different seasons. And then I think it was, I don't know if it was Sandy or Irene, we had a really bad hurricane. I mean, bad. And the next day they went out there and they found this. And the tree had fell from the storm, from the hurricane. So the tree was no more. So this was like the death of a memory. But again, that's capturing it, capturing the image. Take care, guys. Again, let me know what you guys like to shoot. Do you do photography? What kinds of photography do you like to shoot? I would love to hear from you. That is my photography podcast. It was great hearing from you guys. And I was, I'm happy to have shared my images with you. Thanks a lot. I enjoyed talking about them. I hope you enjoyed them. I hope you enjoyed the tales and stories behind them. And I hope you enjoyed the images. Until my next photography podcast, Focus, Recompose. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye now.